Hi, welcome. I see we have some more people joining. My name is Craig Moss. I'm a director at the Cyber Readiness Institute. We're going to give it a few more minutes because we have other people that have indicated they wanted to join also. So again, welcome. Thanks for joining. I'm sure you'll find this to be valuable, and give it a minute or two and then we'll get started. I think we'll give it one more minute and then we'll start, and just because I don't want to chew up your time for those of you that were on time in getting here at 3 o'clock. Okay, Marion, what do you say we get started?
Yeah, I think that sounds good. I'm sure a couple of people will hop on in the next few minutes, but yeah, we can go ahead and get started.
Perfect. So again, my name is Craig Moss. I'm a director, actually director of content at the Cyber Readiness Institute. And with me is Marion Lewis. Marion, introduce.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm the Director of Outreach and Analytics for the Cyber Readiness Institute. So I work with Craig pretty closely on developing things and working with analytics and such. So thanks to everyone for joining us on this session.
So the purpose of this session is for us really to understand where you are in your journey on the Cyber Readiness Program, to be as helpful as we can in guiding you along the way and to answer your questions. So we have different types of groups that we run. So we have a member group, which is more for large companies and getting their input. We have an advisory group that we run. And then this is really our user group. And we're here to support you along the way. So we're going to start off and do a little bit of polling questions just so we can understand what kind of companies you're in and where you are in the program. And then we can adapt our discussion to that. There'll be a lot of room for questions. I think we had about 25 register, but I only see 8 or so on. So we can keep this really interactive at this point. So Mary, do you want to put up the first poll?
Sure. So I'll do the industry one first.
And again, we're just using this so we can get a little bit of visibility into what kind of businesses you are, and then we can try to tailor our discussion to that as much as possible.
So I'll give it a couple more seconds here if everyone could fill in their industry and wait for a couple more people. Okay. So it looks like we've got 3 categories represented on this call.
Okay. So financial services, info, and professional and technical. Okay, let's do the next question, and then we'll go from there.
And this question is asking what stage of the program you are currently on. So meaning our Cyber Readiness Program, if you've registered or not, or if you're in progress. Give it about 10 more seconds. Okay.
Register just started. Okay, so most of you are at the beginning of it, so we'll tailor it along our discussion along that way. Okay, great. Thanks, Marion, and thanks to all of you. So our purpose as an institute, we're a not-for-profit. We bring together senior leaders that are really interested in trying to improve the cyber readiness of all companies that are in their value chain. All the content we develop is free, and it is targeted at small, mid-sized business. Some of you may come from more sophisticated companies. Some of you may be familiar with things like the NIST cybersecurity framework. This is not intended to be at that level. I'm actually on the NIST Center of Excellence for Cybersecurity. That's a whole different level. What we're trying to do is to demystify cybersecurity and make it actionable in small and mid-sized businesses. And we focus a lot on the behavior aspect. These are the organizations that provide the funding. We are not promoting any of their products or services. Some people ask us, are you actually, is Microsoft trying to encourage the use of Azure Cloud or things like that? That's not at all part of this. This really is an effort to try to help organizations to improve their cyber readiness. So our approach, and for those of you that are just getting into the program, I think this is important to keep in mind. The program is really designed around human behavior and helping you to improve the behavior of others in your organization in a practical way, focused on 4 key issues: authentication, which most of us would think of the basic part of it as passwords; patching, which is really just keeping software updated; phishing, and the use of USBs and removable media. We have developed, in addition, we have templates in the program on incident response. Also, we have developed ransomware guides. And one of the things we've been doing now in response to COVID-19 and people working more and more remotely is we've published a series of remote work guides, cyber readiness for remote workers. And those are also all free. They're available on our website. They are not actually integrated into the program yet. They're like supplemental information. I want to focus on the idea of practical and creating a cyber readiness culture. And for all of you, it's really important to be thinking about making this practical. A lot of organizations that we work with and that we talk to that are further along in the cyber readiness journey sometimes end up with things that are impractical for their workforce to do. And then what you end up with is a workaround culture. And we really want you, as you go through, to get input from the other people that are involved and to try to make things practical. We're focused on supply chain security because all of you are linked to other organizations, whether you call it supply chain, whether you call it customers you're linked to, vendors you're linked to. These are all things that are connected through networks and computer systems. And it's important that all of you understand that any of you can be a gateway to another organization, and any organization that you work with can be a gateway to you. Our program is built around the idea of a cyber leader. And we've had really good feedback on this. And I'm assuming that most of you are going to be the cyber leaders in your organization. We'll go into that a little bit. And then finally, we get input not only from the members, but also we do have a small business advisory group. Actually, we just had a meeting with them yesterday where we try to get input on some specific topics from them on how we could modify the program or develop more content. So just real quick here, you're not an island. And the whole idea that you need to keep in mind is that every endpoint in your network, whether it be an employee working from home, a contractor, your managed service provider, a customer, every endpoint is part of a connected system that hackers can access. And this was an example from last summer where the hackers got into Quest Diagnostics, not only through the access to a system used by American Medical Collection Agency, so that's a vendor, but it was a billing vendor one level further down. So there were actually 3 organizations here that were used to penetrate Quest Diagnostics to get the 12 million customer list. That is something that you all need to be concerned about. And especially now with people working from home more and more, we'll get into that a little bit more as I talk through the program, but that's an important thing for all of you to keep in mind, is it's not just how secure you are as an organization or an individual, but you do need to try to cascade the thinking around cyber readiness to other organizations or individuals that you come in contact with. Now, one thing I do want to highlight, and I want to encourage you to complete the program, is that 74% of the users that have completed the program said it had a high or very high impact on their organization's cyber readiness. And we've had had over 20,000 downloads of information. We have a champion network of organizations. For example, Cyber Hawaii is an organization that promotes cybersecurity. It's a quasi-governmental organization in Hawaii that promotes cybersecurity. And we do a lot of webinars and work with Cyber Hawaii. It's just one example where we have 150, 200 people will come on and we'll talk to them about some of the issues that they face. So the program has proven to be effective. It shouldn't take you too long. We'll get into a little bit more detail on that in a minute. At any point, if you have questions, you can use the chat to ask Marion a question, and she will stop me and we'll address it as we go through. We also have room for questions and time for questions at the end too. So for those of you just getting started in the program, it focuses on 4 issues: authentication, patching, phishing, and USBs. And along the way, we provide you different stats, but a couple key things for you to keep in mind is authentication. 80% of data breaches could be prevented by using 2-factor authentication. The other thing that's kind of a fun stat, 17% of people use their favorite sports team and the current year as their password. So you think about how easy it is for a hacker to set up a program that's running down a location, whatever, Pittsburgh and Steelers 2020. In any organization they look at, they're going to find people that are using that as a password. So that is one of the things that I like, little things like that you can tell people in your company that kind of opens their eyes to things like that. Patching. 77% took advantage of vulnerabilities in the software that's already in your computer. And the thing with patching and keeping your software updated is it's easy to do because most of the software, like O365, has auto updates. And unless you're in a complex environment with a lot of different software packages, and you're concerned about causing bugs in one or inoperability problems between different softwares, larger companies will often set up sandboxes or test environments to test updates before they install. For small, mid-sized businesses, if you're primarily using some of the major softwares that are used, Adobe suites, things like that, we recommend you turn on auto updates. The minute that a patch is released, all the hackers know, they analyze the patch to see what vulnerability it's trying to solve. And it gives them, in a way, a roadmap to more quickly penetrate that vulnerability. So they rely on the fact that some people are going to be slow patching their software or updating their software. So that's a really important piece to it. Phishing is the one that everybody's heard about now. It's really common. I think most people are getting good at identifying the really, really lousy phishing attempts, but they're getting really good too. And so that is sort of constant vigilance about phishing and educating the people in your company about certain aspects of how to identify it, but also what not to do. And in the remote work guides that we've talked about, for example, certain things like you should never let people in your company send money in response to an email that they get. You should never let them send out personal identifiable information in a response. There should always be some kind of verification, ideally voice verification or verification through an alternative channel prior to any kind of action like that. And then finally, USBs and the use of other removable media. This is really common. A lot of people don't understand the implications of it. There can be brand new USBs that you pick up at a trade show that already have malware on them, not because of the people at the booth you picked it up from, but because the malware was placed on it at some point up in the supply chain. So those are the four issues that we really focus on. And we believe in the research that we've received from some of our member companies is that if you get better at these four things, you will significantly reduce your cybersecurity risk. I'm going to pause there for a minute. Any questions so far? And now we're going to dive into the program, and I can answer. I'll give you a little bit of background on each stage, but I'm here to answer questions that you have as we go. Any questions so far? I will take that as a no. So the program was designed around 5 stages. And the people on our team that designed the program, we have expertise, of course, in cybersecurity, but we also have expertise in change management, in organizational culture, in things like that, because we believe that cybersecurity is a combination of people, process, and technology. You can't solve it with technology. And for small, mid-sized businesses, we don't want to encourage you or say, hey, for you to get more secure, you have to spend a lot of money on hardware or software. We want you to focus on the things that don't cost money, that just take time to get people to change how they behave a bit. So getting started is really the beginning part. And quite a few of you are, I think, just getting to that stage where you're picking a cyber leader. And you don't need to I'm going to go into each of these stages individually. Assess and prioritize is where you would start to then learn more about the issues and establish baseline metrics, and also prioritize what to protect. Agree and commit is where you would develop policies using our templates. Rollout is when you start to train the workforce. And then measure success is really when you then are again measuring to see how far you've improved from the baseline. And that's where we have that 74% high or very high impact number from. So I'm going to go stage by stage, and I do encourage you to ask questions at each stage if you have any. If I don't get questions, it leads me to wonder one of two things. Either it's been remarkably clear and you have no questions at all, or you're completely lost and you don't know what to ask. So as we go, it's good to hear from you along the way. So the getting started, really this is about picking the leader and getting the leader, making sure that the leader understands what their role is. It does not need to be overthought. We recommend here that the leader and whoever the head of the organization is sign a simple agreement. There's a template there. We think that that little extra step of formality is good because it makes the leader feel that it is something that's being recognized as important in the organization. But again, you don't need to overthink this. This could be a stage that literally happens in an hour. Once the leader's selected, the rest of the program is really geared at the leader and how they can proceed to improve the cyber readiness of the organization. Marion, any questions so far coming in?
Yeah, so someone wants to know if the cyber leader, I guess, has to be the CEO or if it could be the COO.
A good question. It does not have to be the CEO. The cyber leader could be anybody in the organization that you think would be effective at communicating to other people about some of the basics of cybersecurity. They don't need to be technical. Some of the best cyber leaders that we've seen have been people that are more from like the HR side of things. In a really small company, it could be anybody in that company. You know, like in a 5 or 6 person company, it could be whoever you think is going to be the most engaged in trying to take this on and help to educate the other people. Any other questions on this first getting started piece? Okay. I do want to emphasize that it does not need to be somebody with technical background. The program itself has enough guidance in it and enough information in it that they can do it without needing, you don't need an IT person to do it. So assess and prioritize. Here in this stage, what we do is we provide some templates to help you prioritize what you're trying to protect. And one of the things related to this is that when you think about cybersecurity in your company, there's really 2 things that you should be thinking about. One is, what happens if I lost my data or couldn't access it through something like ransomware or things like that? And the other is business continuity. What if my website went down? So in some companies, business continuity is much more important than data loss. In other companies, data loss is much more important, and in some it's balanced. So one of the things we do ask you as you prioritize is think about what information is most important. So if you're a financial services company, of course you have personal identifiable information of your customers. You might have bank account information, balances, you could have things like that. That would be highly critical information to protect. So you want to protect that in a more secure way than other information. And one of the philosophies of cybersecurity is you cannot protect everything equally well. Can't do it. So that's why we want you in the beginning, we have a template for you to just simply jot down what are the most important what's the most important data, what are the most important systems to protect. Again, it shouldn't take that long to do it, but it just gets you thinking. We then provide information on the 4 key issues. We have a simple form in there that asks you to establish some baseline data. And the questions in it, you don't have to actually do a survey. It could be just based on your opinion. But there are questions in there like, do we have a formal policy on passwords? Do we have a policy on the use of USBs? Things like that. Or what % of our people do you think would be aware of our USB policy if you happen to have one? Things like that. Real simple, just to establish a baseline. And that helps you to understand some of the things that you're going to measure later. We talked about prioritizing what to protect, and we do have a little information on going to the cloud. And in this remote work environment, a lot of issues are coming up around going to the cloud. So for example, file sharing. A lot of companies that were not doing file sharing through a cloud-based system like Box or something like that before are rushing to try to do cloud-based file sharing now. because they realized that in the office, they might have all been connected to a network, or possibly people just walked around with USBs sharing information as needed. It really depends on how your organization was set up. But going to the cloud's important. And we do also in our resource guides have a new cloud FAQ that should give you some really good basic information on the cloud and how the cloud can improve cybersecurity. And perhaps most important, your role as an organization in cybersecurity if you do go to the cloud. Because that's another issue that comes up, and that's actually something we're working on this year, is the responsibility between the organization, your company, and a managed service or cloud service provider. A lot of companies think that if they hire a managed service provider, somebody to set up their network, install the software, things like that, that they have basically outsourced cybersecurity to that managed service provider. Wrong. Definitely wrong. What you've outsourced is certain technical aspects of cybersecurity. What you are still responsible for is the behavior of the people in your company. So that's why, again, we brings us back to the behavior idea here. Any questions at this stage? Okay, I'll go ahead.
Craig, really quick, a question just came in. Someone wants to know a little bit more about VPN.
Sure. In a remote work environment, VPN is one of the most important foundational things that you should do. So as people push to work remotely and more people work remotely, setting up a virtual private network is one of the foundational steps that you really should do in order to be cyber secure in a remote environment. We can't emphasize that enough. The other thing, and I could talk about this either now or when we get to the end, but the other things to be thinking about remote are what devices are your people using? And for a lot of larger companies just tell people you can only use company issued devices. Whether you're in the office, whether you're at home, whether you're traveling, you can only use the company issued device. So that person would be given a company laptop and a company smartphone. And they only can use it for company business. They can't use it for personal. They can't download any software onto it. With small companies, and yesterday on our advisory group call, small companies may not have the budgets to do that. And so they end up, when people are working remotely, a lot of them are using personal devices and even shared personal devices. So you think about somebody that went home to work, they didn't have a company computer to take with them. They got home and they have a computer in the den or in the library that's shared by them, their spouse, if they're married, or their partner, possibly their kids. Maybe they have 2 computers for 4 people. They have kids trying to work, do schoolwork from home. That creates a whole nother level of cybersecurity risk, but also important cyber readiness issues to deal with. So that's another piece to it, is what kind of devices are they using? Is it company issued, personal, or personal shared? And then there's certain guidelines that we've issued related to each of those situations. Next would be how they connect. So are they connecting through a private Wi-Fi? What if they're using a shared or public Wi-Fi? Would be another. But in either case, they should be, if you can set it up, they really should be using VPN, a virtual private network. The other thing that's really critical in a remote environment, even more so, especially if it's shared devices or not company issued, is make sure they turn on multi-factor authentication. Those 2 things alone are really, really important. We can come back to that topic later. I'm sure remote work is on a lot of people's minds. So stage 3, agree and commit. When you all get to this stage, we have policy templates here that you can use in your organization. You can modify it as you see fit. And you then can use this as a policy. And we also have an incident response plan template. And the incident response plan is really important. And if you have one in place already, you definitely should review it in light of remote work and COVID-19. And the same for policies. If your organization already has any cyber policies, make sure to review them. The people on our advisory call yesterday said that one of the first things they had to do was to update their policies and communicate the new policies to the workers that were now working from home. Because they're different things. Like I just mentioned, what if you're using a personal device? That would change the policy. So this is what happens at stage 3. This is really where the leader gets to the end of that first part before they start to roll it out. Very important piece here too is as you do the incident response plan and as you customize the policies, make sure to get input from other people. So like if you're a small company, but let's say a larger small company, 50 people, and you do actually have a couple different departments in there, ask the other department heads. Say, hey, here's a policy that I'm thinking about, would be good for us, would help us related to use of USBs, or here's one related to phishing. What do you think? Would this be practical for your department? And by doing that up front, you're getting their buy-in and you're avoiding the really, really negative impact of having policies that people ignore. In many ways, it's worse than having no policy, because what you've done is you've created a workaround culture where everybody feels that it's okay. Hey, we know the rule is no USBs, but Joe does it, Mary does it, I'm going to do it. That creates a workaround culture. And that's something that we want to avoid. And one way to avoid that is to get input from other people along the way. So stage 4, what we have here for you is communication kits. So we have posters. We have some great pictures from companies that we get where they've put the posters up in like coffee rooms or break rooms or stuff like that. We have training materials that you can use with your workforce. We have email announcements, different things like that. And part of building a culture is not just to have the one-time training, but just like little short, fun communications to them. That's why the posters come in handy. There could be little like postcardy type things that you can print out from our materials, things like that, that just kind of keep it front of mind for people. Doesn't make it too heavy, but does keep it front of mind, because we do want people to kind of integrate it into how they operate. So that, people in the beginning, they're going to say, oh man, multi-factor authentication is a real pain in the neck. I hate multi-factor authentication. I've got to wait, I got to get the thing. Sometimes I don't type the right number in, blah, blah, blah. I hate it. Well, at a certain point, they're going to get used to doing it, and they're going to realize that it's important and valuable. And part of your job as a cyber leader is to help that take place. Why do we do multi-factor authentication? Because it's going to prevent this type of breach. If we get a breach like that, and we have stats like this in here, if we get a breach like that, do you realize that on average, 81% of companies that have a breach lose customers? We don't want to lose customers. If you just use multi-factor authentication, the chance of us losing customers goes way down. So that's part of what the cyber leader needs to do. They don't need to know the technical ins and outs of how multi-factor authentication works, but just to explain the basics of it. So that's stage 4, the rollout. And we do have here, again, in terms of formality, we do include a workforce cyber readiness pledge. And again, it's optional for you to use it, but we strongly recommend it. And the reason for it is, by getting people to sign this little simple pledge, I agree to, do my best to comply with the policies, blah, blah, blah. By getting people to do that, it creates that extra level of formality. Plus, it creates a record so that if you have a customer that says, hey, do you guys have anything in place related to cybersecurity? You can say, yeah, we do. And actually, here's a pledge between all the workforce. Everybody in the company has signed this pledge. And by the way, as the cyber leader, I actually have a pledge that I signed with our general manager or boss or whoever it would be. So those little pieces help to create that culture where people realize it's important. They realize that, you're doing your best to try to make it simple and practical, but it is an important thing. So that's really the end of stage 4. Any questions about stage 4? I must be extremely clear today. So then stage 5 is measure success. And here, this is just about measuring to see what's happened. That rollout stage usually depends on the size of your company. I mean, we've had some people that small companies go through the whole thing in a week. Others will say that it takes them maybe an hour or so, maybe an hour or two a week for 4 weeks, 6 weeks. Some stretch it out a little more, maybe do a couple months, but it should not be a big time burden. And a lot of it's just around building that awareness. And the cyber leader is really the person that takes charge of that. And that's why, as we say, you don't need to have a technical background to be a good cyber leader. It's really more of the ability to communicate and stay engaged with people about the topic and help to communicate the importance of it. Just one little thing, if you think about it and related to like with incident response plans and stuff like that, you think about this in relation to fire safety. Okay, companies now pretty much all have some kind of fire safety awareness. And, we're just kind of indoctrinated now to the idea of, how do you get out of a building? A lot of laws and regs have been built up around that. But most people would have an idea of what to do in the event of a fire. And the other thing is they would have an idea as to how serious the fire was at an early stage. Cybersecurity and a cyber attack or an incident, people don't have that. A lot of people in your company, they might not know what to do if they think their computer is infected. You might have no idea what to do. And that's dangerous. It's dangerous for you, and it creates a feeling in them of helplessness at the time. They don't know if it's like a little smoldering thing in the wastebasket that they could dump water on, or if it's something that they should call the fire department about. So just that little bit of awareness helps people, and so they know what they should do in an incident. You as the leader should know what to do in an incident. And again, practical stuff. But unfortunately, given the uptick in cyber crime, and especially now in the remote work environment where the phishing attempts, ransomware attempts have escalated really, really rapidly, you kind of have to assume that something bad could happen to you, as much as I hate to say it. And you have to be ready to respond in the case that it does. And in our incident response guide, for example, we have a decision tree in that. And I encourage all of you to get a hold of that. But if you have done a backup of your information and tested it, response to ransomware can be pretty simple, easy, and not painful. If you don't have backups or have backups that you haven't tested, it can be really, really complicated and painful. So a lot of it is preparation and a lot of it's prevention. And that's what we try to focus on here is behavior that will help you to prevent incidents. But even with that, you do need to know what to do if an incident does happen.
Hey, Craig, you have some questions.
Perfect. I'm ready.
Um, so someone wants to know if our program helps with preparing for CMMC.
No, I mean, it would at a basic level. CMMC is a maturity-based model put out for defense industry. And it would cover a lot more detail. The control level would be far more sophisticated, and it uses a 5-scale maturity model. Whereas our program does not use a maturity model, and we're really focused on those 4 issues. Where it would help with CMMC is in what CMMC calls the basic hygiene, which I think there gets you up to level 2 or 3, maybe, something like that. So it would help you with CMMC, but it's not the equivalent of CMMC. And I'm happy to, if you have more questions on that, I'm happy to address it deeper.
Great. And then someone else is saying that she teaches cybersecurity at a small agriculture and tech college, and she's struggling to convince small farming concerns that they need to address our top 4 at a minimum, meaning our core 4, the phishing, patching, passwords, and USBs. And Kathy wants to know if we are familiar with any threats to agriculture beyond the generic small business threats, or if we have any members from the agriculture sector.
None come to mind. One of our pilot companies was actually in ag. We could check back with them. But to your point, I think it was Kathy, finding examples from a very similar industry, you're on the right track there. We had a church group that we've worked with that said that the only way that they could get attention of the leaders was by showing examples of another church that had been hacked. We have been doing work on the auto supply industry. We're doing work for GM's dealer network. We have not really done a lot directly into ag. So I can't help you there, but hey, Mary, maybe jot down a note. Maybe we should look to see if we can find any stories
For sure.
about ag.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another thing that we ask of you in terms of building a community. If you come across stories, Kathy, if you do find one on ag, we would love to have you share it with us. What we sometimes do on our website is we'll post, like if we see an article, we'll post the article and then write it like a quick, like, what does this mean for small business analysis attached to it. But you're right on that. We find, and it's kind of ironic, but that a lot of people just wait, not until they know about incidents in general, but it has to be something that happened to somebody just like them, which is unfortunate, but true.
And she just sent a follow-up message. Kathy, if you want to come off mute, I think our group is small enough that we could just have a little dialogue here. But
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
she was just saying that her university has an agreement with John Deere, so the auto industries would be helpful too. But Kathy, happy to hear more from you.
Thanks, I really appreciate it. Yeah, I'm retired from the National Security Agency and I've moved to upstate New York with the farmers. And so I've gone from DC to the middle of nowhere in New York. And so it's a little bit of a culture shock for me, but it's a challenge, right? And so how do I get farmers to pay attention to this before there's a food crisis? I mean, they all have industrial control systems. I mean, you see them on the news when they're, saying, oh, we have to throw our milk out. That's all computer controlled. And they're like, yeah, but nobody's going to hack that. Okay. They use drones to survey their fields for fertilizer and irrigation control. Their John Deeres are all controlled electronically. They have, they have to take them to a dealer to have them repaired or have the dealer come out to them because of the right to repair stuff. So it's like they just don't recognize how totally connected they are because of where we live and the environment that we're in. So it's definitely a challenge.
And this is something that we grapple with too. So I can't give you an answer, but I can tell you about our thought process. we have found that you do need to balance the carrot and the stick, like, you know, the horror stories and then the benefits of it. And one of the things, there was a Gartner survey a couple of years ago that said I think it was by 2021, 50% of companies will assess the cyber security of a vendor before awarding them a contract. So that might be one type of stat. And I think we have some stats like that in our program. So in stage 4 of our program, the training materials, feel free to use those, and you can, you know, adapt them and try to use those with the groups if they're useful to you.
Okay, thank you.
We would also be willing to do, for some groups, I've done work for rural technology centers before. How many people are out there? Like if we pulled together a webinar for your group, how many people would be out there?
I would be hard pressed to give you a number. Even just at our university, we probably have 100 agricultural faculty alone, teaching anything from livestock management to, you know, plant management, turf management, dairy production. So any of those kinds of things. Plus we have a cybersecurity department, which is probably 10 or 12 people.
Yeah, so I mean, if you
Even
wanted,
our local market, our local co-op lost control of their domain and had to reestablish a domain. And it's like, you know, just some password management might have helped right there. So just
right.
silly things like that, right?
Right. So stay in touch with Marion, because Marion, it might be worth setting up some kind of special webinar for your group. If
That would
that's
be
helpful.
fabulous. We're
If
trying
that'd be
to work
helpful.
with some of the local high schools as well to try to get them engaged. They're trying to teach more, you know, in Future Farmers, those types of organizations, and try to get it, you know, move it further back in the age group, you know, so we have the kids telling dad, hey, maybe you could change your password on the, you know, the barn control Wi-Fi.
Right, right, right. That's good. That's good. Yeah, no, we'd be happy to follow up with you. So Marion will follow up with you, and then we'll figure out how we can help.
Okay,
Also,
that'd be
too,
great. Thank you.
we've also, for like Cyber Hawaii, I've been doing, Marion and I are doing, I think, our third webinar for them. We've been focusing on remote work issues as one of the themes that we've been focusing on there as people work remotely more. So if that, or other people on the call, if that type of thing would be of interest, you know, we can certainly recreate that. This is very much focused around the program and users of the program. But, you know, we're happy to you know, help you out in any way we can.
And quickly, there was another comment about the timing of these user support webinars. I know we attract a wide array of people from all over the world, so time zones are varied. But Raphael, I know you mentioned having this be a couple hours earlier would be helpful. I'm curious to hear from the other people on the call if you just want to, you know, type in the chat whether this time was good or if earlier or later would be good. We want to appeal to the widest audience possible.
Yeah, I think actually we did this one at this time in part because of Hawaii. We've had so many, although I'm not sure how many of these people are from Hawaii. We've had a lot of people.
Looks like we have
from Hawaii.
someone in the PST time zone.
Okay.
We're here from the East Coast. Craig and I are.
So on to remote work, and we have a couple minutes left. I could talk to you a bit about remote work unless anybody else had any questions at all. Just it's small enough. If you want to come off mute, I'll pause here for a minute. You can come off mute and ask questions. Do it that way.
And I also put both Craig and my own email in the chat. So feel free to reach out to us after this session as well, if you want.
Okay, I'll start.
On the remote side, I had a question. I work for a small business. We're a government contractor, a U.S. government contractor. And we went through the whole thing about company purchased equipment versus allowing employees to use their personal or home equipment. And somebody brought up the idea of using a Moby key, which basically turns your home computer or your personal computer into a dumb client and creates a secure work site where all the work is done either on your company computer in the office or on a server. Do you have any experience with that as part of an alternative to VPN?
We have heard about some companies using that. We see a big trend in this is larger companies using VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure, which is basically doing the same thing. It's going back to the old days where there's a central server and all the end devices are dumb. What you're describing would in fact protect the device, but I'm not sure. I'd have to look at it more carefully. The VPN is also protecting the connection itself. So I'm not sure if the key. Do you have any familiarity with whether it would replace or would it supplement?
I believe it replaces, because we have one of our people that has a government contract, and the government issued her, instead of issuing her a government furnished laptop, they issued her a Moby key to connect into a computer that they have set, a desktop computer they have assigned to her on a government site.
I think it's certainly a good direction. If you can't get somebody a personal device, I mean, a company issued, I think that does make sense. Does make sense. But I have not heard of a lot of other small companies doing that yet, but it could be because it was coming from the government.
Okay, thank you.
The other thing, one of the other things that we've been working on is in one of the remote guides, we talked about devices, of course, connections, and then access. And one of the things that companies needed to think through also is a lot of companies found that when people were not working in the same office environment, they needed access to different information than they did in the company. And that was creating a lot of what we'll call workarounds in terms of access control, where people were sharing information outside of the normal channels in order to get their work done. Or if, some companies had to furlough certain people. So if these 3 people got furloughed, who takes over their access, who gets access to their information, what information did they have before they were furloughed? I actually did a seminar yesterday for the American Bar Association on data leakage and trade secret leakage in response to COVID-19. And pretty much everybody, unfortunately, anticipates that there's going to be an enormous amount of data leakage over the next year as a result of COVID-19 and all the remote work. So as companies struggle to try to get things back under control. And for a lot of companies, the cybersecurity aspect of it was not the core thing that they were trying to do. They were much more focused on business continuity and keeping things operating than they were on the security aspects of it. So now that there's kind of a what I'll unfortunately call a wave where we're kind of used to working remotely, people are now starting to look at what do we need to do to try to tighten up the controls, whereas that first phase was very much just about how do we maintain business continuity and maintain operations. Any questions coming in? Anything you want to talk about? And from you, stories that you want to tell or things that you want to ask each other. We're here to try to build out a community of people that care about this.
Looks like the working from home kind of struck a chord with personal computers and the challenges around that for a couple of people. but I know audio is a problem for someone, so they're staying on mute. But I think that topic was good that you touched on that, Craig.
Okay. Okay. And I mean, just a couple simple, we also have a do's and don'ts for some of the remote guides we write some for the managers and some for the home workers. And so in terms of some of the do's and don'ts, you know, if your people are using personal computers, make sure that they are not saving things, depending, again, it depends on if you have file sharing set up, but ideally they shouldn't be saving things to their personal computer. If it's a shared personal computer, they really have to log out. There should be separate identities so that they log in with one identity and whoever else is logging in on that computer is using a different identity. Those are some of the foundational things that are really, really important to establish, but also to make sure people are trained on it. We were talking with one organization that had actually set up VPNs, but when we surveyed the people in the company, we found that over half of them didn't really know how to use it, or didn't know, like they would say it's a pain in the neck, it keeps cutting out, it slows my access, and they didn't really realize the importance of it, and they hadn't really been trained sufficiently on not only how to use it, but why it's important. So that's the other thing, is just in this, you can't just throw technology at people. You really do need to find a way to gain their commitment. So logging out is really important. Not saving things locally is really important. Another thing would be changing the home Wi-Fi passwords. A lot of people have never changed their home Wi-Fi password. It's on the default setting. So depending, and again, you have to think about how much does a hacker care about getting into your system, or how easy is it for them to scan thousands of systems to find one that has a vulnerability. So if you're using the default password for your Wi-Fi, they could be able to just skim that and find hardware devices that are using the default password. So those are just some of the little things that as we work from home remotely that we just need to be conscious of and be more careful about. And people aren't, you can't expect people to think of all these things on their own. That's why we try to kind of help people to think it through, why we want to learn from you about what's going on that you see and how we can help you.
And Craig, really quick, I know we're running out of time, so I put our link to the remote work resources that we have in the chat, and that link we update, you know, pretty frequently with new materials. So definitely check back on that frequently. But Raphael, I want to address your point really quick, and feel free to send us an email, and one of us will we can discuss a little further. But he was wondering about leveraging device authentication to help address remote security and risks related to key logging. So Craig, I don't know if you want to get into the weeds with that, but I know there's some questions out there.
Raphael, great question. I think we can respond to you in more detail on that one.
Yeah.
Because we've come to the end of the hour, but you know, there's certainly different ways to track devices that are logging in. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. We hope you found it useful. We hope that you stick with the program and try to get through that program, and we're here to help you. So along the way, feel free to reach out and get in touch with us. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.